Welcome everybody. My name is Tomasz Ivesic and I will be moderating this panel titled Reproducing Academic Elites Under Totalitarian Systems. This panel is organized also as part of the research project in collaboration with New University and the European University Institute in Florence. The project is titled Universities Under Pressure, Party Personnel and Dissent in Socialist Slovenia. We have three colleagues that will present today as part of this panel. First one is Agata Zušek. She's a historical sociologist, works at the Research Center for the History of Transformations at the University in Vienna and at the Institute of Sociology at the University of Łódź. Her latest book, titled Limiting Privilege, Upward Mobility Within Higher Education in Socialist Poland, published in 2023, examines first-generation students' struggles with reluctant academia. She was a member of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton in 2017-2018, and currently she is the principal investigator at the RC Starting Grant Class Up, which examines upward mobility in post-war Eastern Europe. Dear Agata, you will have 15 minutes as also other colleagues, and we'll have a joint discussion after all three of you. Thank you.
So I have a small question, because what I'm seeing, we have a pretty small audience. Is it going to be later available for recording? Shall I, for example, just add a presentation and...
Yeah.
Okay, so let me maybe share some slides. I will be summarizing argument from the book you have mentioned, which was tackling with the project of Socialist University and how it affected reproduction and opening of universities. But let me see where I can share. It's always technical issues there, right? Okay, here it is. Okay, so the presentation is about the whole book. However, today I would like to focus on a few aspects only. Okay, what do you see?
Yeah, we can see. Yes.
The title. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Yes. Thank you.
So let's proceed. So my starting point was looking at 45 and the post-war reforms as a kind of a new opening for academia. And I think this is a pretty adequate metaphor of social revolution happening because of the war in Eastern and Central Europe, and also post-war reforms, nationalization of industry, agrarian reform, and one of the third pillar of this kind of modernization and reconstruction of the country was education. And often used term in the period from 40s and the 50s was so-called democratization of higher education, which meant that the universities, the structure of both students, graduates, and later also faculty should reflect the structure of society. So therefore the democratic was simply equal access to education, to the knowledge, but also to the academic position. And this is the field we'll be focusing on today. So the reference point, despite the social revolution and the war, or war like as a social revolution, was interwar time. And in case of Poland, academia was already very conflicted, already bigger influence by the state was introduced in the reference in the 30s, and it was triggered by many conflicts, rising anti-Semitism, nationalism, which is important for us because it's kind of consolidated leftist and liberal environments, leftist and liberal professors who later in the 45 were this kind of the base reformers who were thinking how to build university anew in this new circumstances in 45. And because Warsaw was destroyed, and there were even discussions that it should become the museum of war, the biggest city of the time, the biggest city where reconstruction was taking place was industrial city of Łódź, very fortunate for the narrative of the central position of working classes. And also there was a gossip that the university going to be established, new University of Łódź. So lots of faculty, from example, from Warsaw ended up in this industrial hub for 45 till more or less 48, 49. Here we have a map of the old and new institutional, also shifted border of Poland, which is also important for this reproduction of environments and milieus, intellectual milieus. Because as you can see, there were certain patterns. People tended to exchange information, where to go. Whole faculties, almost those who survived, of course, the war, were traveling together. And in Łódź, it was famously called by John Connolly as a magnet for leftist intellectuals. That became the place for the reconstruction. Not only the government moved there from temporary government, but the ministries or publishing houses, kind of a very, very vibrant environment. And during the 40s, also discussion about the shape of university began, and later the reforms from the academic year 47, later in 48, slightly the whole structure of studying was changed. And what interests us here is this, how democratization was implemented and how universities were opening for supposedly working class and peasant students. This part I will skip very briefly. Those were intellectual discussion about the role of universities. What I'm interested in here, what's important for now in this brief summary, is that the reform assumed that university is going to be for the students who do not know how to study. So it was very much structured. It was designed almost like a work in the factory. Very impressive, massive action of encouraging to enroll at the universities was performed in local press, in the factories, in kind of blizzard newspapers in the villages. Press was full of the examples of successful students enrolling, peasant, war orphans, people from very remote areas entering education that was open thanks to the new socialist state. What is also important assumption at this time, this democratization I have mentioned, assumed that even 80% people, which was never, of course, achieved, should enroll at the universities in each cohort. So the reform was really massive, and it was also followed by the tools developed by the faculty itself and in a way absorbed, so to say, by the state reform. Some of those tools, let me just skip the press elements, some of those tools assumed that we have to actually start earlier. The moment that a person enrolls at the university is in a way too late. All selection mechanisms are working much earlier, during elementary school, high school, and so on. Also after war, as we can imagine, the war losses kind of disturbed trajectories of education were profound. So one of those tools were preparatory courses, which are kind of in just 2 years preparing pupils to enroll at the university. Another was, for example, initial year, kind of a 1 year preparing for exams. And through the first post-war years, many people of those more modest backgrounds were indeed enrolling and entering university, which was probably unimaginable for them during the interwar period and for most of their peers as well. So what we know from the sociological research that started to be conducted in the late 50s, those people who entered university from preparatory courses and initial year were often treated with kind of a classism as racism or other prejudice towards the certain group is based on the social origin, which as a social category is also crucial for post-war Poland in designing the university. What is important here from the perspective of reproducing elites, it was really hard to keep on going. It was really hard to stay in academia for a person of more modest background. And I was interested exactly in what was happening later, after graduation, not only what kind of position, what jobs those students, those social climbers were taking, but for mostly most elitist part of the society, that is professors. So for this, I was conducting interviews and following biographies of the professors who started the education during this reform, during the Stalinist reform in the late 40s and in the 50s. And I was checking like who became a professor, what were their social background, what their were families, how they narrated their academic career, and so on. And there was lots of sample contextual material from the written biographies from other universities, but I would like to really quickly wrap up the findings of what was happening and how faculty was functioning. Let me skip this as well. So for the professors, finally I focused with the narrative interviews on a group of almost 30 over 50 people. And this might not be very clear, but I was trying to measure qualitatively how was the economic capital, the economic material situation with the cultural capital of the families. And that was often very difficult because not everyone was mentioning family. This is how data was extracted from the biographical interviews. But we can clearly see that there is kind of the structure and overrepresentation among professors, which is not a surprise, of people coming from nobility houses, intelligentsia families like doctors, lawyers, and so on. Very few kind of middle of the structure, railway workers and teachers, which is important because in the interwar those were state protected positions with more stable income, and a very, very few workers and peasants. What is important, the professors I was focusing are from the University of Łódź, not technical university, and I think the case would be pretty different for the technical higher education. But what is more interesting when we look on those few peasant biographies we have, I will also skip this for sake of time, we can also see that class intersected with gender. And in case of female professors, we have really, really few women who made it from this middle strata, like teachers' houses. This is generally the lowest social bracket you can have, and you are a woman to maintain structurally in academia and succeed to become professors. Most of women were from the highest, the most elitist social backgrounds. Here are a few quotes also showing why it was so and how the double burden or the triple burden during socialism kind of enforced selection mechanism in case of female to be professors. What I also noticed, there were few kind of breaking points, differences between academic biography, kind of a hegemonic assumed default path, and those peasant biographies. And I also don't want to focus on that too much for the sake of time. I would like to focus on the kind of practices that allowed such a strong selection of people from more modest backgrounds to enroll, to graduate, and later to stay in the academia. Through the interviews, we can see many examples of this kind of first selection mechanism based on classism during their studies. People of peasant and working class origin, however problematic those categories under the period, we can discuss that later, tended more often to have poorer job, more often rely, for example, on obligation to work, so assignment to position by the state, not, for example, by their social contacts and family connections, as was often the case for more elitist backgrounds. People already knew after graduation which position they might take, in which school they're gonna work, or maybe at some research institute or in the factory that was safer and well paid. So we have already a mechanism of redistribution of jobs. And for academia, this is very narrow and kind of sensitive to all the distinctions field. We can see practices like not revealing, for example, that there is a post at certain department. Selection based on kind of common understanding of values, very strong ethos of bilateral relation of the student and the master, whose kind of very subjective criteria selects a future protege, future PhD, or what we would call today a postdoc. So the jobs at the universities are secured still by these inner rules. And what we see in the end with the narratives of those very few peasant and working class children becoming the professors, that over the time all the values, all the narrative about socialist university that allowed them to enter academia and finally stay in academia, I'm almost blurred. Those few differences you see here, like the background from coming from families of lower capitals, having kind of exterior influence that kind of pushes them out of the structurally determined biographical path towards academia in this case, tendency to have more safe choices, and the avoiding privilege relates to the state privilege. So for example, after graduating from pedagogical high school, they were supposed to have a safe job as a teacher, and they had to go against it to still continue their studies at the university. There were very few difference between those kind of mainstream academic biography and those people of the peasant background. So from this qualitative study, I frame it as this limiting privilege, that there were kind of two privileges clashing. First one was the state's privilege. This was the one introduced by the reform, by the socialist state, under the slogan of democratization, that was pushing formally and allowing people from more modest background to enter academia. And the second privilege was intelligentsia privilege, all this kind of soft knowledge, all the connections, social capital, scholastic capital, who allowed them to maintain, kind of defend the university from both social climbers, but to some extent also the political impact and changing kind of the ethos. We're talking about the generation that was educated in the 40s and 50s, so it definitely changed over the years. However, still in the 80s, the faculty in Poland was domain of intelligentsia. Almost 80% were of intelligentsia origin, and still universities remained a very, very narrow path that allowed this kind of imagined upward mobility. The socialist reform allowed dissemination of education to the extent of including elementary classes, elementary schools, but also high school education. By this I mean vocational school, training professionals. But higher education, despite being a slogan during post-war years, remained the domain of intelligentsia and allowed more reproduction than change and kind of changing the social background. And this is the main argument of the book. I'm happy to talk about some more details, but I try to be really, really fast and coherent with this 15 minutes presentation. So I hope we'll have some conversation and debate afterwards. Thank you. I will stop sharing the presentation for now.
Thank you very much for your paper. It was very interesting, and I believe we'll have a good discussion after it. Our next speaker is Josip Mihajlovic. He's a Croatian historian and senior researcher associated at the Croatian Institute of History in Zagreb, where he also serves as an assistant director. His research focuses on 20th century Croatian and Yugoslav history, particularly political repression, the Yugoslav security services, dissident movements, and Croatian labor migration. He has authored several scholarly books and numerous articles, and actively participates in international research projects. I'm happy to say that he is also the apologies. He's also involved in teaching and public history initiatives, and especially the very well known the radio program of historical controversies, or povijesne kontroverze, on the Croatian radio. He will talk about the historians and knowledge production at the Institute for the Labor Movements of Croatia. Dear Josip, you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomasz. I cannot see myself, although my camera is on. Do you see me?
We don't see you. We see the presentation, and we can hear you very well. Okay,
then we will stick to the presentation now, because it's the main thing you should see. You shall see. Okay, so thank you, Tomasz, for this introduction, and I'm pleased to join you in this conference. So in this paper, I examine the Institute of History of the Labor Movement of Croatia as a specific institutional space in which scholarly practice and ideological expectations intersected in socialist Croatia between 1961 and 1991. Although formally established as a research institution, the Institute operated within the ideological framework of the ruling League of Communists of Croatia and League of Communists of Yugoslavia, of course, and it was expected to produce some interpretations of the labor movement, the partisan struggle, and the socialist revolution. The central question I address is therefore quite straightforward. How did historians working at the Institute navigate the tension between academic standards, and political loyalty. And to answer these questions, I draw on archival sources, internal documents, personal files, of course, and published works, books, and etc., focusing particularly on their research practices, interpretive boundaries, and career trajectories. The institute was founded in 1961 as part of a broader political initiative, the leadership of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia, so to produce some kind of a comprehensive multi-volume history of the labor movement and the socialist revolution in Yugoslavia. This was not merely a scholarly project, it was also a project of, I will say, political legitimation. In this context, Republican institutes were established across Yugoslavia, including the Croatian case. Formally, the institute had a wide range of tasks. I will not tell you every aspect in every article about that, but the main focus was to study the labor movement and to research the national liberation struggle. However, these talks were embedded in a clear ideological framework. From the outset, the institute functioned as some kind of a hybrid institution, combining scientific academic work and political expectations. The first director of the institute was Franjo Tudjman. At the time, he was a general in the Yugoslav People's Army. His appointment reflected a political intention to shape historiography in a way that could counterbalance dominant interpretations, particularly those perceived as a centralist or Serb-oriented, which was back then in the late 1950s and early 60s. Tudjman gathered a group of young scholars and intellectuals, many of whom combined revolutionary credentials with growing professional ambitions. And at the same time, the institute remained closely tied to the party. So about 65% of employees were members of the League of Communists, and recruitment was subject to political vetting, of course. And this created a structurally embedded tension between professionalization and political control. Already in its early phase, the institute moved beyond its initially prescribed framework. Instead of focusing exclusively on the labor movement and socialist revolution, its historians began to address broader questions of national history and historiography. This shift quickly generated conflict. A key episode was the critique of Velimir Terzic's book Yugoslavia in the April War, and of course the official book overview of the history of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia. Both of those books were published in 1963. In these critiques, institute historians challenged what they saw as a Serbo-centric narrative that marginalized other Yugoslav peoples. So this was not simply an academic disagreement, it was perceived as some kind of political challenge. The party leadership reacted strongly, and Vladimir Bakaric, who was, I would say, a chief communist in Croatia at the time, Bakaric was asked to bring Tudjman into the line. The conflict intensified in 1964 when Tudjman emphasized the greater role of Croatian partisans, and of course some other views from the Croatian historiography. He was accused of adopting nationalist approaches, although he initially retained support within parts of Croatian Communist Party, League of Communists of Croatia. Well, this moment is revealing, in my opinion. Historiographical debate was tolerated only as long as it did not disturb the political equilibrium of the federation. By 1965, the situation escalated further. Tudjman was formally investigated and reprimanded as he was required to align the institute's work with the official party line. And even though the sanction was relatively mild, it clearly signaled the limits of interpretative autonomy of historians at the time. So the Jasenovac question was the most sensitive issue which emerged in the 1960s. A memorial inscription planned at the site mentioned 600,000 victims of the Jasenovac concentration camp. However, the historians at the institute argued that this number was significantly exaggerated. As a result, the inscription was never installed, and this episode is crucial because it demonstrates the emergence of empirically grounded research, but also the persistence of politically defined historical truths. Of course, there were some other issues in 1966 regarding the institute. In autumn, members of the institute's party organization criticized director Tudjman for showing too much understanding toward dissidents Daniel Iving and Nikola Cholak, who were associated with dissident Mikhailo Mikhailov. Of course, Iving and Cholak were not dissidents at the time; they became that later, but they were associates of the institute, but only because they contacted with Mikhailo Mikhailov. These contacts were considered very, very suspicious and unwanted. So, of course, in the same year, there was a case of Bruno Bušić, who was a young scholar associated with the institute. In 1966, Bušić was convicted for hostile propaganda, primarily due to his possession of émigré publications. However, this case reflects something broader, in my opinion. He was targeted as a politically suspect intellectual, someone who expressed views outside the acceptable ideological framework. This illustrates that the control of knowledge extended beyond academic institutions into the realm of legal and political repression. The turning point was in 1967. I don't know, are you familiar with the Croatian history? The 1967 was the year when the Declaration of the Croatian Language was published. Tudjman was suspected of supporting it, and he was forced to resign as a director of the institute and was subsequently expelled from the League of Communists. His work was condemned as bourgeois and methodologically incompatible with Marxism. And of course, this moment is a good symbolic point where we can say that this was the beginning of a period of a tightened political control. After 1967, the institute was reorganized. The new director, also historian Dušan Bilandžić, represented a more politically reliable director, leader. And at the same time, the founding of the institute was reduced, staff numbers declined, and the research became more closely aligned with the official expectations. The reduction of of staff after 1967 clearly reflects a broader process of institutional disciplining. We can see at these data that there was a sharp reduction in staff after 1967. So in the period of Croatian Spring during the early 1970s, the political context was, of course, completely shaped by the Croatian Spring, while Croatian society experienced a renewed interest in national history and reform movement for reforms were for more democratic society. The institute did not follow this trend. Instead, it reinforced a class-based interpretative framework, focusing on social structures rather than national narratives. So, of course, and on the other side, the institute engaged in what can be described as a historiographical counteroffensive, I will say, rejecting national or glorifying narratives and reaffirming ideologically acceptable interpretations. And the last case I want to show you is the case of Ivan Jelic, who was also a historian at the institute. In 1980, he was one of the editors and authors of the Encyclopedia of Croatian History and Culture. Jelic questioned the politically established figure of the number of 700,000 victims of Jasenovic's concentration camp. Instead, he advocated a more empirically grounded approach, of course, and this triggered strong reactions from veterans organizations and political structures. In 1981, Jelic was forced to resign from his editorial position. His work was obstructed, and the encyclopedia was withdrawn from public circulation. It was banned from selling it in the bookshops. So also this case is, of course, very. It demonstrates that even in the late socialist period, these boundaries of historical work were still there. So to conclude, I will say that the history of the Institute reveals a complex relationship between knowledge production and political power. The Institute functions simultaneously as an instrument of ideological reproduction and also as a space for academic work and professional development. Historians working there were not simply passive actors. They actively navigated the constraints of the system, developing strategies that allowed for a certain degree of scholarly autonomy. But of course, there were only few of them who dared to do so. However, whenever their work touched upon politically sensitive issues, especially national questions or the interpretations of wartime violence, it provoked institutional and political reactions. So the cases of Franjo Tudjman, Bruno Bušić, Daniel Livin, Ivan Jelic, they, in my opinion, clearly illustrate the mechanisms of control over knowledge and intellectual activity in socialist Yugoslavia. The Institute shows that historiography in such a system was neither fully autonomous nor fully controlled, but rather a field of continuous negotiation between academia and ideology. So that will be all from me, and I'm open for your questions and for this discussion afterward. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Josip, for your paper. And fast forward, we have the last speaker for today, my dear friend and colleague, Željko Oset, who is a historian and currently a research associate at the RC Project Sovereignty, where he studies the oaths of allegiance of Catholic dignitaries in Yugoslavia. He's also a visiting researcher at the Study Center for National Reconciliation in Ljubljana, where he researches the role of Amnesty International in the pardoning of political prisoners. In addition, he is a member of a research project at the European University Institute focusing on the reproduction of academic elites in Slovenia. His paper is titled The Role of Character Assessments in Slovenian Academia in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Željko, the word is yours.
Thank you. Do you see my PowerPoint presentation?
I think we can see that you are sharing screen, but we don't see the presentation now. We see the Zoom screen.
I don't see it.
No.
Željko, maybe you can use this share settings where you can. Okay, yeah, I can see it.
We can see it now. Just
Okay,
go.
okay. Thank you. So I will start. I will speak about moral political evaluation, so-called characteristics, which have been so far rarely used in discussion about the reproduction of the Slovenian academic elite, which in late 1940s and 1950s were concentrated at the University of Ljubljana and the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts. So in the latest overview of history of University of Ljubljana, Božo Repe argued that character assessments were relatively unimportant and that political influence by Communist Party was perhaps strong in summer of 1945, but in later years and decades was only minor. I disagree with this opinion. That's why I decided to look into the collection of Communist Party, which gathered characteristics for educated non-party individuals. And right now I'm working on a text which hopefully will be published as a book, and I will prepare an analysis and also transcription of those characteristics, but because I think this is critically important to understand how Communist Party function in academia. First steps toward introducing characteristics was taken at Christmas Eve 1945, when communists at university in university committee decided that each secretary has to have overview of membership under his or her supervision. For this purpose, he has to keep a special card index recording work of each member, evaluation of that member, and any disciplinary penalties. Such records were meant to make it possible to prepare a proper characteristics whenever needed. 2 months later, the party also introduced a system of personal questionnaires forms for all members. Each party member had to fill out a questionnaire and write a political self-assessment while two other comrades had to write their own their own assessments. And after that, they had a meeting at party cell where they discuss those assessments. And university committee suggested that party cells should invite secret police to write their own characteristics or provide information to make these discussions more productive. So those meetings were quite harsh on some individuals who were dispelled from the Communist Party. And the second group, for which characteristics were written from March 1946 onwards, were those who obtained degree during the Second World War in Yugoslavia and abroad, for example, in Italy, Hungary, or Germany. And additionally, characteristics were prepared for recent graduates, both party members and non-members. Their main purpose was personal placement, that's assigning young educated people to work collectives. This assessment also served as initial information to local communist organization and also to local authorities about the person who was being sent to their backyard. A third group consisted of students and professors going abroad for lectures, conferences, research, or specialization. As a rule, the first political assessment within this cohort was prepared by the secret police, and the second one by party cell or relevant department or faculty. The third group for which characteristics were prepared were non-party members, and those characteristics were prepared after the Tito-Stalin split. So we can observe for those non-party members that they have in their personal files one characteristics from April-May 1949 and another one from April 1950. And what did a typical characteristic assessment consist of? Most characteristics were structured around three criteria: scientific excellence, pedagogical competence, and moral political formation. In practice, the assessment evaluated those three interconnected layers. Professional evaluation often reflected traditional academic standards that persisted after the war. Although in the humanities, such assessment could be strongly ideological, for example, measured against dialectical materialism or the use of Soviet scholarship. The decisive element, however, was the third category. This included social origin, political orientation, organization wants such as participation in trade unions, the Liberation Front, or the other mass organization, and also personal traits. The language of the assessments was strongly ideologically coded with terms such as progressive, science, idealism, and our line. Positive markers included cooperation with the Liberation Front, sympathy for the party, and the use of Soviet literature. Negative markers included idealism, clericalism, Western orientation, or apoliticism. On this basis, different types of evaluation emerge, ranging from clearly positive judgments that stabilized academic positions to cautiously positive evaluation under political supervision, to explicitly negative judgment that could lead to blocked promotion or removal from academic life. My preliminary findings suggest that the highest attrition among professors occurred among those described as headstrong or as poor pedagogues, who were critiqued by student mass organization. And I also prepared a case study for Anna, Dr. Anna Havlina, who graduated in 1940. She spoke several languages, and during the Second World War, worked at Ljubljana General Hospital. In October 1947, she became an assistant physician specialist and also assistant at the university. So her characteristic was prepared in March 1949. At the beginning, her colleague stressed that she does know her very well, that she knows her well only that she knows her only 4 or 5 months. Even though, despite this fact, she wrote characteristics, which was based on rumors and our, I'm quoting, our female activists. And the central part of this political assessment was political. And author claimed that Dr. Havlina was associated with white guard family background, a negative attitude toward people's power, hostility toward communism, and pro-Western orientation. Her political profile is constructed less through concrete actions than through interpreted behavior, a sarcastic smile, ironic remarks, and what was underlined that her colleagues uh, thought that she was more feeling than actual facts. And there was also one quote that Dr. Havlina expected that Tito-Stalin split will substantially change relations at the medical faculty. And I quote here, "No, the Bolsheviks will no longer be able to dictate to us. The West is the West." So in a couple of years, Dr. Havlina lost her position at the University of Ljubljana and decided to skip to less stressful position as a physician in local health institution. So now I'm going to conclusion. So there could be several conclusions, but I think the most important one is that characteristics initially were a tool to control party members and those who are traveling abroad. And after the Tito-Stalin split, those moral political assessments were used for other non-party members. So if you have any questions, I will happily answer it.
Okay, thank you, Željko, as well. We have concluded with our three presenters, and now I am opening possibilities to pose questions to the public. We have a small audience, but still, if there is anyone that would like to pose a question. Okay, no one. Is there anyone out of the three presenters that would like to pose a question? If not, then I have a question for, well, practically, I would say all three of you in a way. Well, first of all, thank you for your papers. And my question goes into the direction of that, you know, people employed at the universities or at the institutes, you know, they were kind of having dual function under state socialism. They were, on the one hand, experts in their own field, and on the other hand, they also, well, most of them, at least if they were in humanities or social sciences, they also had a role as public intellectuals that quite often would, raise their voice in the newspapers regarding different topics. So my question for all three of you is, were these, can we say that there is a distinction between intellectuals and experts? I would argue that maybe an expert can be an intellectual, but an intellectual cannot always be an expert in a way. And so I would like to hear it from your case studies. What would be your thinking of this?
Shall I start as the first speaker?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I would distinguish still one other group. If we think about intellectuals, like public intellectual experts, like I don't know, sociologists of work, still I would argue that there is a place for like a faculty, because teaching was a very, very important domain, especially under this reform. If you want to disseminate education, if you want to create this new socialist university, teaching was the first task of these institutions. And I think situation would look differently in academies of sciences that were all around the bloc established, and there you would have more intellectuals and also experts, while especially in the case of sociology, it's very clearly seen that sociology sometimes play this expert role, as aforementioned sociology of work, but academics, members of faculty, still remain very closely related with the university, and not so often actually take a stance publicly in newspapers, like later in some TV expertise. And I think it also differs if we're talking about the capital or smaller cities. And in my case, while Łódź was crucial for the post-war years, later, as we know, capital was moved back to Warsaw, and for sure there where the politics, the public intellectual roles were much more vivid and important. So I would kind of defend that we still have professors as for whom the main domain is university and teaching, not so much this kind of so exciting for us as historians, public and engaged roles. Yeah, that would be my comment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Josip?
Hi. Well, it's a very good question, I will say. It's an old question regarding the divide between experts and intellectuals. Actually, when we speak about intellectuals, I remember the book written by Julien Benda, The Betrayal of the Intellectuals, who said that in totalitarian systems, when the intellectuals do not raise their voice, they are not intellectuals. So basically, maybe the example of the Institute of Labor Movement in Croatia is a good example in which we can differ between experts and intellectuals. In my opinion, those who were not involving in very sensitive topics and who were avoiding that, maybe we cannot call them intellectuals, if you know what I mean. Maybe when we look at the institute, maybe there are only 4 or 5 people I mentioned, like Tudjman, like Bušić, like Ivan Jelić, who were experts, of course, especially Jelić, who was a very renowned historian. He was a famous historian. But in 1980, he said that some things are not true when we are talking about the Second World War, and he had consequences because of that. he was expelled from some of the journals he was in, and of course his position at the institute was very bad after that. So, in my opinion, this is a good example. Maybe this is the line which differs the experts from the intellectuals. If you are quiet when you should say something which is regarding your work, and your work can reveal something to the public, you have to say that. I think these examples are very good for that differentiation between experts and intellectuals.
Okay, thank you, Josip. Željko?
Yeah, this is really good question. I think in Slovenia, in late 1940s, 1950s, we can observe this broader generational pattern. The older generation who taught at university before the Second World War were after the war more cautious in their public appearances, whereas the younger generation, younger professors who were, let's say, more into politics, were more outgoing. And there, I think it's a separate cohort of researchers who are mostly at the Academy of Sciences doing important research for industry or on the field of nuclear research. Those scholars use their research sometimes to speak about broader social issues, also about democratization of education, the topic about which Agata spoke, and also about vision of socialism. So I think there is a lot of different takes on this.
Okay, thank you. Does three of you have anything to add? If not, I will use another opportunity to pose the final question to all three of you. So, based on my own research, I have this feeling that same as for students and for faculty, or experts working in the institutes, that there was some kind of ambiguous relationship between them and the party. Like they could, lose their job, or they would be forced to resign, and they would receive a job in some minor institution, like, I don't know, change position from a researcher at the institute to be employed at the National Library, or etc. But like, I have a feeling that there was always kind of from the party side, that they would always leave a small door open, like if we will need you in the future for some agitation or something, like it was always possible to be, let's say, kind of recruited back. And I was wondering if you have the same feeling regarding your own cases. Maybe we can start with Agata, based on students or faculty examples.
I have a very good example for this, which is also based on John Conley research, that during the Stalinization and kind of a purge of reactionist bourgeois scholars, I think 11 assistant professors lost their jobs and 9 later got back. And we see a lot of that happening with, for example, sociology, which is like banned during the Stalinization, and most of the departments changed their names, changed the domain of research, Hashinsky, who was one of the designers of Socialist University, starts to focus on Africa and like all the strategies of mimicry with the system. So I think it worked here both ways, because it's not the party that is thinking, or the political domain, we might need them, but also academia being very active. And I actually want to blur this with the other direction, like who is the party? Because many of the faculty members of that time were socialists, were communists, agrarians, who wanted to be active, who wanted to participate in creating of institutions, and lots of them were seeking active roles in the party, like in the structure of government, supporting expertise for reforms, getting money for the research. And especially in the second half of the 50s, I think it's really difficult to say who is the evil party and that wanna just push on the university, and what is kind of the blurred of the intellectuals wanna have agency, wanna be active. And thinking about public intellectual, what about the intellectuals who go in a mainstream of like political activity? And it's kind of very easy to just tag them with supporting of a totalitarian system, saying that maybe they're actually trying to push it from inside. So my voices would be going into two directions, showing that actually this kind of resistance, this kind of clash of privileges, as I call it in the book, is coming from the both sides, the state or political field and the intelligentsia, social scholastic capital. And at the same time, they often blur, and it's very difficult, especially from today's perspective, to say what were the people's motivation, how, to what extent they were true believers and pragmatism, and does it actually matter if the effects are what they are, so to say. If anything is what it is, of course, in the subjective paradigm. Okay, thank you. Sorry, that was maybe too long an answer.
No. Thank you. Wonderful. Josip?
Yes, you said did the party leave the door open for them, if I understood right? Well, for instance, if we take Tuđman's case, for example, it was a great case in to show that, especially that, because when he, for the first time, opened this critique against the dominant narratives, he was approached by his comrades who tried to tell him, okay, don't do that, do not so openly. Maybe you have to approach in a more sensitive manner. So he had a couple of chances to in a way retain his position as a director of the institute, but he didn't. I think he was aware that he's playing a role as a public intellectual, a man who has some kind of a mission, and he really played it in a way. But the party, of course, did leave door open for him in the first attempts, in the first couple of years, I will say, until 1967. And after that, it was finished. He ended up in prison twice in the 70s and again in the 80s. So I think that everything depends on the party circumstances, because as you know, in Yugoslav Communist Party there were some clashes between party comrades, between left-wing party, between dogmats and reformists in the party. So every position of every intellectual was related to the context of a political context of the party.
Thank you, Željko.
Yeah, I think I found quite a lot examples, especially for those who went abroad for postdoctoral studies or research and were reluctant to return to Yugoslavia. And they were reprimanded, but the door was open if they decide to come back, or at least enable other Yugoslav researchers in their institute or something like that. So there was always open discussion between them, and most those cases were discussed when they need renewal of their passport. So the authorities had remained open channels to discuss with those researchers and reluctant to return to Yugoslavia.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I have more questions, but it's already almost 4:15. So, yeah, Željko, you have a question?
Tomasz, maybe we can discuss about planned workshop in Ljubljana, because Agata is already here and Josip as well.
Yes, so as further activities of our research project, me and Željko are organizing a workshop on 18th of May. And we'll shortly send a call for application. And there will be all of the details there. And both me and Željko would be happy if we would be able to continue this debate, maybe in person in Ljubljana.
Is there any place for negotiating the date?
I will use the German Jein.
Yeah, okay, I know this, yeah.
I'll send you the email, and you let me know regarding the dates, and then
Yeah.
we'll see what would be possible. Yeah.
I just have a pretty important event here in Vienna on the 18th
Okay.
in the afternoon, so maybe something is possible. And we depended on the other professor who's coming from Hong Kong, and it was really that
Okay.
was really late. But we can figure it out later on. Yes.
Okay.
It's always like
So
this.
let's say we'll be in touch, and this panel is a great starting point for further collaboration. And I would like to thank all three of you again in the name of the organizers for participating in this year's conference. It's about people, and luckily we will have more opportunities to discuss our work in the future. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.